Greetings. Yesterday we did the visitation. Now we're doing the preparations for the birth of Jesus, the pregnancy. And then they're going to Bethlehem. So, subtext: the Blessed Virgin's preparations for the birth of Jesus, journey to Bethlehem. I saw the Blessed Virgin for many days with Anne, while Joseph remained alone in Nazareth. One of Anne's maids was taking charge of the house for him. They, Mary and Joseph, received their principal support from Anne's house as long as she lived. I saw the Blessed Virgin near Anne sewing and embroidering bands and tapestry. They seemed to be very busy in the house. Joachim must long since have been dead, for I saw Anne's second husband there and a little girl of from 6 to 7 years old. She was helping Mary and being taught by her. If not a daughter of Anne, it must have been one of Mary Cleophas's children, also called Mary. I saw Mary sitting in a room with other women and preparing covers large and small. Some were embroidered with gold and silver. There was one large coverlet in a box in the midst of the women, at which all were working, knitting with 2 little sewing needles and balls of colored wool. Anne was very busy. She went around from one to another, receiving and giving wool. All expected Mary to be delivered in Anne's house, and these covers and other things were being prepared partly for the birth of the child and partly as gifts for the poor. Everything was of the best, and all abundantly and richly provided. They knew not that Mary would, of necessity, have to journey to Bethlehem. Joseph was at that moment on his way to Jerusalem with cattle for sacrifice. I saw Joseph return from Jerusalem. He had taken thither cattle for sacrifice and had put up at the house before the Bethlehem gate. It was at this same inn that he and Mary stopped later on before Mary's purification. The keeper of the inn was an Essene. Joseph went from there to Bethlehem, but did not visit his relatives. He was looking around after a place to build, also for some means of procuring lumber and tools, for in the spring after Mary's delivery, which he thought would take place in Nazareth, he intended to remove with her to Bethlehem, as he did not care for Nazareth. He wanted to get a place near the inn of the Essene. From Bethlehem he went again to Jerusalem to offer sacrifice. When he was returning from this journey to Jerusalem, and about midnight was crossing the field of Kimki, 6 hours from Nazareth, an angel appeared to him and said that he should set out at once with Mary for Bethlehem, as it was told there that her child was to be born. The angel told him, moreover, that he should provide himself with a few necessaries, but no laces, nor embroidered covers, and he mentioned all the other things he was to take. Joseph was very much surprised. He was also told that, besides the ass upon which Mary was to ride, he was to take with him a little she-ass of 1 year, which had not yet been foaled. This little animal they were to let run at large, and then follow the road it would take. I saw Joseph and Mary in their house at Nazareth. Anne too was present. Joseph informed them of the commands he had received, and they began to prepare for the journey. Anne was very much troubled about it. The Blessed Virgin had all along an interior admonition that she should bring forth her child in Bethlehem, but in her humility she had kept silence. She knew it also from the prophecies. She had all the prophecies referring to the birth of the Messiah in her little closet at Nazareth. She read them very often and prayed for their fulfillment. She had received them from her teachers at the temple, and by the same holy women had been instructed upon them. Her prayer was always for the coming of the Messiah. She esteemed her happy of whom the child should be born, and she desired to serve as her lowest handmaid. In her humility, she had never conceived the thought that she herself was to be the one. From those prophecies, she knew the Savior would be born in Bethlehem. Therefore, she lovingly submitted to the divine will and began her journey. It was a very painful one for her, since at that season it was cold among the mountains. Mary had an inexpressible feeling that henceforth she must and could only be poor. She could possess no exterior goods, for she had all in herself. She knew that she was to be the mother of the Son of God. She knew and she felt that, as by a woman sin had entered into the world, so now by a woman the expiation was to be borne. It was under the influence of this feeling that she had exclaimed, "Behold the handmaid of the Lord." I understood likewise that Jesus was conceived of the Holy Spirit about the hour of midnight, and about midnight should be born. I saw Joseph and Mary with Anne, Mary Cleophas, and some servants silently setting out upon their journey. They started from Anne's. An ass bore a comfortable cross seat for Mary and her baggage. On the field of Kimki, where the angel had appeared to Joseph, Anne had a pasture ground. And here the servants went to get the little she-ass of 1 year which Joseph had to take with him. She ran after the Holy Family. Anne, Mary Cleophas, and the servants now parted from Joseph and Mary after touching leave-taking. I saw the two travelers going some distance further and putting up at a house that lay on very high ground. They were well received. I think the proprietor was the leaseholder of a farm called the House of Kimki, and to which the field belonged. From it one could see far into the distance, yes, even to the mountains near Jerusalem. I again saw the Holy Family in a very cold valley, through which they were making their way toward a mountain. The ground was covered with frost and snow. It was about 4 hours from the house of Kimki. Mary was suffering exceedingly from the cold. She halted near a pine tree and exclaimed, "We must rest. I can go no farther." Joseph arranged a seat for her under the tree, in which he placed a light. I often saw that done at night by travelers in those parts. The Blessed Virgin prayed fervently, imploring God not to allow them to freeze, and at once so great a warmth passed into her that she stretched out her hands to Joseph that he might warm himself by them. She took some food to renew her strength. The little ass, their guide, came up with them here and stood still. The actions of the little animal were truly astonishing. On straight roads between mountains, for instance, where they could not go astray, she was sometimes behind, sometimes far ahead of them, but where the road branched, she was sure to make her appearance and run on the right way. Whenever they reached a spot at which they could halt, the little creature stood still. Joseph here spoke to Mary of the good lodgings that he expected to find in Bethlehem. He told her that he knew the good people of an inn at which, for a moderate sum, they could get a comfortable room. It was better, he said, to pay a little than to depend upon free quarters. He praised Bethlehem in order to console and encourage her. After that, I saw the Holy Family arrive at a large farmhouse about 2 hours' distance from the pine tree. The woman was not at home, and the man refused Joseph's admittance, telling him that he might go on further. On they went until they came to a shepherd's shed, where they found the little ass, and where they too halted. There were some shepherds in it, but they soon vacated after showing themselves most friendly in supplying straw and faggots or bundles of reeds for the fires. The shepherds then went to the house from which Mary and Joseph had been sent away. They mentioned having met them and said, "What a beautiful, what an extraordinary woman! What an amiable, pious, benevolent man! What wonderful people these travelers are!" The man's wife had now returned home, and she scolded at their having been sent away. I saw her going to the shepherd's hut at which they had put up, but she was timid and dared not enter. This hut was on the north side of that mountain on whose southern declivity lay Samaria and Thebes. Toward the east of this region and on this side of the Jordan, Salem and Anon were situated, and on the opposite side, Succoth. It was about 12 hours from Nazareth. The woman came again with her 2 children. She was quite friendly and seemed to be very much touched by what she saw. The husband also came and begged pardon. After Mary and Joseph had refreshed themselves a little, he showed them to an inn about an hour further up the mountain. The host, however, excused himself to Joseph, pleading the numbers already there. But when the Blessed Virgin entered and begged for shelter, the wife of the innkeeper, as also the innkeeper himself, changed their bearing toward them. The men at once arranged a shelter for them under a neighboring shed, and took charge of the ass. The little she-ass was not with them. She was running around the fields, for when not needed, she did not make her appearance. This inn was a tolerably fine one, and consisted of several houses. Although situated on the north side of the mountain, it was surrounded by orchards, pleasure gardens, and balsam trees. Mary and Joseph remained overnight, and the whole of the next day, for it was the Sabbath. On the Sabbath, the hostess with her 3 children visited Mary. Also the woman of that other house with her 2 children. Mary talked to the little ones and instructed them. They had little rolls of parchment from which they read. I too made bold to speak confidently to Mary. She told me how extremely well it was with her in her present condition. She felt no weight, but sometimes she experienced a sensation of being so immensely large internally, and as if she were hovering in her own person. She felt that she encompassed God and man, and that he whom she encompassed carried her. Joseph went out with the host to his fields. Both host and hostess had conceived great love for Mary. They sympathized with her condition. They pressed her to remain and showed her a room which they would give her. But very early the next morning, she started with Joseph on their journey. They went forward a little more to the east along the mountain and into a valley, increasing the distance between them and Samaria, to which they seemed at first to be going. The temple upon Gerizim was in sight. On the roof were numerous figures like lions or other animals, which shone with a white light in the sun. The road led down into a plain or the field of Shechem. After a journey of about 6 leagues, they came to a solitary farmhouse where they were made welcome. The man was an overseer of the fields and orchards belonging to a neighboring city. It was warmer here and vegetation more luxuriant than at any place they had been, for it was the sunny side of the mountain, and that makes a great difference in Palestine at this season. The house was not exactly in the valley, but on the southern declivity of the mountain which stretches from Samaria to the east. The occupants belonged to those shepherds with whose daughters later on the servants remaining behind from the caravan of the 3 kings had married. In after years, also, Jesus often tarried here and taught. Before departing, Joseph blessed the children of the family. I saw him and Mary journeying over the plain beyond Shechem. The Blessed Virgin sometimes went on foot. They rested occasionally and refreshed themselves. They had with them little rolls and a cool, strengthening drink in nice little jugs, brown and shining like metal. The seat that Mary used on the ass was furnished with a pad on either side as support for the limbs, which were thereby brought more into a sitting posture. The support was over the neck of the ass. Mary sometimes sat to the right, sometimes to the left. Berries and other fruits were still hanging on the bushes and trees that were exposed to the sun, and these they gathered on the way. The first thing that Joseph always did on arriving at an inn was to prepare a comfortable seat or couch for Mary. Then he washed his feet, as did Mary also. Their ablutions were frequent. It was quite dark one evening when they reached a lonely inn. Joseph knocked and begged for shelter, but the owner would not open the door. Joseph explained to him his position, telling him that his wife could go no farther. But the man was inflexible. He would not interrupt his own rest. And when Joseph told him that he would pay him, he received for an answer, "This is not an inn. I will not have that knocking." The door remained closed. Mary and Joseph went on for a short distance and found a shed. He struck a light and prepared a couch for Mary, she herself assisting him. He brought the ass in and found some straw and fodder for it. Here they rested for a few hours. I saw them departing early the next morning while it was still dark. They may now have been distant from their last halting place about 6 hours, about 26 from Nazareth and 10 from Jerusalem. The last house stood on level ground, but the road from Gabbatha to Jerusalem began again to grow steep. Up to this time, Mary and Joseph traveled no great high roads, though they crossed several commercial routes which ran from the Jordan to Samaria and to the roads that led from Syria down into Egypt. So far, the roads by which they came, with the exception of that single broad one, were very narrow and ran over the mountains. One had to be very cautious in walking, but the ass could tread its way securely. Now I saw the travelers arrived at the house whose owner was at first uncivil to Joseph. He threw the light on Mary's face and twitted Joseph on having so young a wife. But the man's wife took them in, gave them shelter in an outhouse, and offered them some little rolls. When they left this place, they next sought lodging in a large farmhouse, where also they were not received in a manner especially cordial. The innkeepers were young and paid little heed to Mary and Joseph. They were not simple shepherds, but rich farmers, such as we have here, mixed up with the world, with trade, etc. I saw one old man going about the house with a walking stick. From here they had still 7 hours' journey to Bethlehem, but they did not take the direct route thither, because it was mountainous and at the season too difficult. They followed the little she-ass across the country between Jerusalem and the Jordan. I saw them arrive about noon at a large shepherd's house, about 2 hours from John's place of baptism on the Jordan. Jesus once passed a night there under his baptism. Near the house was another for the farm and sheep utensils, and in the house was a spring from which the water was conducted through pipes to the bathtubs. There was a large public house here, and the numbers of servants who took their meals at it were going and coming. The host received the travelers very kindly, and he was very obliging. He insisted upon one of the servants washing Joseph's feet at the spring. He also supplied him with fresh garments while he aired and brushed those he took off. A maidservant rendered the same services to Mary, for the mistress of the house was backward in making her appearance. She lived retired. She is the same that Jesus afterward healed of a 30 years' sickness. He told her that her malady had come upon her as a punishment for her want of hospitality toward his relatives. But I know the reason of her non-appearance to Mary and Joseph. She was young and rather frivolous. She had caught a glance of the Blessed Virgin, had spoken a word to her, perhaps, I do not now recall all the circumstances, and had conceived a feeling of jealousy on account of her beauty. It was for that reason she kept herself secluded on this occasion. There were some children in the house. At their departure about noon, Mary and Joseph were accompanied part of the way by some of the people belonging to the inn. They proceeded westward toward Bethlehem, and arrived after a journey of about 2 hours at the little village consisting of long row of houses, with gardens and courts lying on both sides of a broad high road. Joseph had connections here such as spring from the second marriage of a stepfather or stepmother. Their house was finely situated and very handsome. But Mary and Joseph did not enter. They passed through the place and went straight on toward Jerusalem for half an hour. When they came to a public house in which the crowd was gathered for a funeral, the frame partitions in the house had been removed from before the chimney and hearth. The fireplace was draped with black, and before it rested a coffin enveloped in the same somber hue. The male mourners wore long black robes with short white ones over them and had some rough black maniples on their arms. All were praying. In another apartment sat the women, entirely enveloped in their large veils. There was in the yard a large fountain with several faucets. The proprietors of the house, who were taken up with the charge of the obsequies, left to the servants the duty of receiving Mary and Joseph. This was done accordingly, and the customary services rendered the holy travelers, tapestry or mats were let down from their rollers near the ceiling, and a curtained space arranged for them. After some time, I saw the people of the house in conversation with them. The white garments had been laid aside. I saw a great many beds rolled up against the walls. They could be entirely separated from one another by means of the mats let down from the ceilings. Early the following morning, Mary and Joseph again started off. The good wife of the house told them that they might stay because Mary appeared in hourly expectation of her delivery. But Mary said with lowered veil that she had yet 6 or 8 and 30 hours. The woman was anxious to keep them, though not in her own house. I saw the husband, as Joseph and Mary were departing, talking to the former about his beasts. Joseph praised the ass very much and told him that he had brought the other with him in case of necessity. When the people spoke of the difficulty of getting lodgings in Bethlehem, Joseph replied that he had friends there and that Mary and he would certainly be well received. This made me feel so sorry. Joseph always spoke of this with so much confidence. I'd heard him again making the same remark to Mary on their way. It so happened on the last days of the journey, when they were nearing Bethlehem, that Mary sighed longingly for rest and refreshment. Joseph turned aside from the road for half an hour to a place where, upon a former occasion, he had discovered a beautiful fig tree laden with fruit. It had seats around it for weary wayfarers to rest upon. But when they had reached it, they had found, to their great disappointment, that it was at that time quite destitute of fruit. In after years, something connected with Jesus happened near that tree. It never more had fruit, though it continued green. Jesus cursed it, and it withered. End of reading. Oh, there we go. So, notes. Mary reminds me of the I don't know how many of you have actually watched this show. I don't recommend any scripted show, but this one's called Firefly, and it had like a 14-year-old girl prodigy in it named River. And Mary's at this time, she's about 15 years old. Just a bit above 15. So anyways, like Firefly's a sci-fi, and she's a passenger on a ship, and the ship has a crew about 10 people, and they're all, what they fear, she has no fear of, the River character. And what she fears, they dismiss as nonsense. But River was a super intuitive, super smart person. And Mary's obviously supremely more intellectual than she would have been. So you have this barely 15-year-old pregnant girl, and she just knows everything. She has all the prophecies and whatnot. So Anne might have been, well, why didn't you tell me that you were going to Bethlehem? Mary would have been like, you never asked. And that in her sweetest voice, that would just make you melt. And of course, Mary knows what's coming in Bethlehem. She knows she's going to give birth to Christ in a cave. But she doesn't tell Joseph. She just lets him build up his own fall. I'll get into that later. Next note. Anne had plans, Joseph had plans. But when God has plans, well, I get it, because it confuses me. When God has plans, your plans just sort of get run over as if they were in the way of a tank. I had plans with my life, and every one of them went aloft and sunk to the bottom of the ocean. It makes me wonder, was it because my plans were ill-designed, or because angels are purposely sabotaging them because God has plans for me? I don't know, and it's frustrating. This is why life is so annoying. You don't want to persist in stupidity, but then you ask, oh, what if they just failed because I failed at their execution and was not persistent enough? And believe you me, I was quite persistent. You don't know how many things I've written. Let's put it that way. Kind of thing Joseph went through when noticing Mary was pregnant, but didn't know it. Didn't know what to do, because on the one hand, she was the sweetest thing in the world, and he could see absolutely no fault in her character. And on the other, he couldn't just abet a criminal if a crime happened by supporting her. We pray constantly so that God can give us a taste of these plans. Constantly, because we want to know. We just don't want to mess up. It's hard to make decisions when you're ill-informed. But I get his frustration. Next note, the guide she-ass. I have seen many stories of this, and I have experienced, before I could remember, this kind of thing. Animals, I do believe, I have witnessed, can be guided by guardian angels. When I was a kid, I was at my grandmother's house outside after dark, and I was lost in the woods somewhere behind the house. They had this pretty big plot of land. You just walk around the woods. There were trails and stuff like that, but it was easy to get lost. But luckily, my grandparents' dog was around me. His name was Benji, obviously. It's because he looked like Benji, the white, fruffy dog there. And he guided me home, and he was a good, smart dog. But I do think that angels guide them, and they work best with docile subjects, which is why they will often act through dogs, cattle, and intelligent animals. So you see cases where, like in videos, you'll scroll through Twitter and you'll see an animal is struggling, and an allied animal, whether it be deer, dolphin, or whales or whatever, they'll come and tug at a human's attention and then try to lead the human to where the animal's trapped, and then the human will free the animal, and then the animals, they're smart, yes, they're like the sea mammals and whatnot, but then they end up showing gratitude, which is very strange. And I can't help think that, yes, there's angelic influence, because gratitude is a strange thing to see in animals. Next. Inclement weather was also mentioned in Mystical City, and Mary would bear it because it was a sacrifice she offered up to God. And this is Catholic wisdom. But in this case, she was freezing under the tree, and then she called God's help and started heating up, and then warmed Joseph up by touching him. It actually reminds me of the story of Josip Turelia, a Ukrainian who was thrown into a Russian prison because he was fighting for Christ against the communists. I don't know what he was doing. I think he was selling Bibles, or he was smuggling Bibles. Anyways, they tried to put him into a freezing cell for a few days so that he would die by freezing to death. This is how communist Russia did stuff. They'd let you starve to death. They'd kill you in some way. And they killed over, I think, 5 million Ukrainians during their communist time. So, and Our Lady actually did warn them about the suffering to come. Anyways, what happened was that Our Lady gave him heat, gave Josip Turelia heat while he was in the cell, and he survived. So he actually witnessed Our Lady of Khrushchev in 1987. So he was a semi-mystic. I think he also had prophecies. But anyways, go read more on this gent if you like. His name was Josip Turelia, and he ended up emigrating to Canada eventually. So next note. We're also going to see this when we read about the journey of the Magi. I'm talking about the hospitality of the different locations they stopped at. Jesus saying the woman suffered because of being inhospitable towards his relatives is accurate, considering that Sodom was destroyed because the two angels were treated the opposite there. That is, they were treated with extreme inhospitality, whereas when they visited Abraham, he gave them the royal treatment, because he revered them. He knew what they were. Sodom did not know what they were. They just saw beauty and they wanted to desecrate it. However, sodomy was about... a lot of people argue, oh, well, it's only about inhospitality. It has nothing to say on homosexuality. No, the Bible is very clear. The Old Testament is very clear. If you read both Genesis 18 and 19, and you read... it was an episode in Judges where a Benjaminite city did the same sort of stuff that Sodom did, that they wanted to rape a man, and they ended up raping his wife, and I won't tell the story, but it's in Judges. I think the town was called Gibeah. It was a Benjaminite town, and it caused the clan of Benjamin to go to war with the rest of the tribes. So anyways, homosexuality is very bad. Basically, all forms of fornication are bad. Even if you're married to a person, it does not give you right to unlimited fornication. You can only do these things for the purpose of procreating. Otherwise, you're giving into the vice of lust. So anyways, this inhospitable thing. I lament in our times, not just because of the homosexuality and the fornicative agenda of the whole world, the grand degeneracy we're experiencing, but we're so drowned out. Like she goes over to the rich farmer thing. We're so drowned out by materialism, by gadgets and cars and whatnot. We have no meditative moments. We work jobs that are soul destroying because those jobs have absolutely no catechesis built into them whatsoever. And when you're a shepherd, and you're taking after sheep, and you're poor, well, it's fully catechetic because you aren't focused on the things of this world. You're focused on heaven. Like the relationship you develop with your lambs is like the relationship God has with his shepherds. But when you're loading a hopper in a noisy factory next to people who are in, like, basically in a hen's roost, you just feel disconnected, cut off, like you're in a prison of your own miserable thoughts. So, last note, and this one's more amusing. You could see Joseph thinking everything is in order and setting up for his own fall. Reminds me of this Ryan Reynolds movie I watched. I don't remember the name of it, but again, I don't promote scripted TV. So, but in this movie, it's a silly anecdote. But he liked a girl in high school, but he was fat, and then he ended up moving to like LA or something like that, becoming successful, getting really good at ice hockey, so he knew how to skate. And then he went back to that town. I don't know where it was. Obviously, it was in the Northeast somewhere, Northeast U.S. somewhere, Michigan or New England or whatever. And then he was that confident, fit guy, and he was meeting his old crush there. And then there's this scene where he's going to go ice skating with her and other people, and he could only rent skates. The problem is those skates had horrible blades on them. They were dull, and I've skated with dull blades, and it's as comical as it happened in the movie. You can't get any traction. You can't push because your blades just glide on the surface. You need sharp edges so that you can get traction on the ice, so that you can start and stop. So he's just waiting around like an idiot. And this has happened so often in my life. You develop this grand sense of confidence, right? That you can do something, and then you get given dull skates. And it's like what Joseph went through when he's going to have troubles in Bethlehem, and Mary knows. She knows that he's about to get humiliated. But he's like, oh no, I assure you, I got everything under control. And then he gets there, and it's like, no, it wasn't supposed to happen like this. Why? Why? But these are the things we go through in this life. And it just reminds me of that. See, we get the human experiences of Joseph. Anyways, that's it. Ave Maria.